Weekends around the homestead are usually all about catching up. My husband works full-time outside the home, and so throughout the week it's just me and the kids taking care of the various chores, which means projects need to be done over the weekend. I'd like you to come along with us as we tackle a few of those projects. This particular weekend, I wanted to get a few things done. First of all, I wanted to get some bagels made. I wanted to make a pie for Sunday, since although we're still in the season of Lent, I make an effort to make something sweet every Sunday. And I wanted to spruce up the house a little bit, get some decorations that I bought at an antique store up. And finally, I wanted to get some seeds started. It's getting to that time of year where it just needs to happen. As with most things sourdough, I needed to prepare a little bit before I got to actually baking. So this is Friday night and I'm getting my sourdough bagel dough started. To a stand mixer, I added 6 cups of flour, 1 cup of active sourdough starter, 2 cups of water, 2 tablespoons of honey, and 2 teaspoons of salt. And then I kneaded it until it was soft and pillowy. And then I let the whole thing sit on my counter overnight. The next morning, I scraped it out, and then I divided all the pieces of sourdough into, I think it was 16 portions, if I'm correct. And I shaped it all into little bagel shapes. One thing that I've learned with baking is perfection has no place in the kitchen. If you're going to get stressed out about having your baking be perfect, and that's going to paralyze you from ever moving forward, then I really recommend that you toss that notion of perfection out the window and you just focus on getting it done. My bagels are far from perfect. Most of the time I'm making them with little hands trying to help me shape them, as is what happened this time around. And you know what? That's fine. Because I have rarely had instances where I have messed up so badly that whatever I've created has been completely inedible. In the end, it might not be the greatest, it might not look the prettiest, but I'm still able to feed my family, and honestly, that's what's important. So I tried to include as much of a good look at how I'm shaping these as I could. So I'm kind of rolling the shape together into a ball. Afterwards, I'm taking the sides of that ball and pushing it in onto itself to create resistance. And afterwards, I will roll that ball shape up against one of my hands so that it kind of creates an even tighter, firmer ball. And once I feel like it's tight enough, I will pop my fingers through the middle and shape it. You want the hole for the bagel to be bigger than you think you need it, because they are going to get a little bit bigger as they proof. After letting them rest on my counter for a few hours, they were nice and ready to go, and so I got some hot water boiling in a large stock pot. To the hot water, I added 1 tablespoon of baking soda and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Actually, in this case, I did not add it. My 4-year-old added it because he wanted to help. And so we got some everywhere, but no harm, no foul, it's fine. Once the water went back up to boiling, I added those bagels one by one and making sure not to overcrowd the pot. The 4-year-old was so disappointed I wouldn't allow him to put the bagels in, but it's boiling water, I'm not going to risk that. After letting them sit on one side for 1 minute, I flipped them to the other for another minute. Depending on how crispy you like the outside of your bagel to be, you can lengthen that or shorten that by a couple seconds, and it will make a softer bagel if you leave it for a shorter amount of time, and a harder bagel if you leave it a little bit longer. Afterwards, I used a slotted spoon to fish all the bagels out, and I put them on a pan and repeated the process until I had all my bagels boiled on both sides. I used to find sourdough bagels very overwhelming to make, but the more I've made them, the more comfortable I've gotten with the recipe, and I also enjoy that there is no butter or oil that I have to melt to add to the dough at first, and so it's actually become one of my favorite recipes to make. Once we were done boiling all the bagels, we added some organic everything bagel seasoning to the top. Some of them got more than others, but that's fine. Like I said, there's no room for perfection in the kitchen. And then we baked them in the oven at 425 for about 20 to 25 minutes. I like making some kind of bread or bun or bagel on Saturdays because on Sundays we go to church and our parish is about an hour and a half away from where we are. And by the time we're all done at church, it's quite late in the afternoon, and so I like to have a lunch on hand for the kids. So once I was done with the bagels, I decided to put up some of the antiques that I had found at an antique store earlier that week. This store was insane. We'd never been there before, but it was floor to ceiling, just stuff everywhere. You could barely move. But we had some really great luck and found some really interesting pieces. And so one of them was this copper kettle. It's from the early 1900s. It's decorative, obviously. I don't want to deal with copper poisoning, but we got a really good deal on that. I also found a nice butcher block cutting board, and this one's an antique as well. And we found these pillowcases that I'm going to be working on later on today, a little hook, all these things that we got for so cheap. I always find it hard to decorate the house. I'm at a point where we've lived here for long enough that I need to start putting some effort into not just functionality but also decor, because it weighs me down to live in a house that I don't find beautiful. But then I find myself overwhelmed with decisions about what to keep in the house, what would look nice, what would go with the style of it. So decorating our home has really been just this very long process. Over here, I'm just washing a wool blanket that my husband found for $20 at the store, and I just wanted to make sure that there was no bugs or anything to it, so I put it in the dryer for about 10 minutes, and then I washed it with a very mild wool detergent. Once I was done that, I got to work on those pillowcases that I found at the store. I paid $5 for each of these, which was quite exciting to me because I'd been looking for these and I found something similar on Etsy and they wanted like $100 per pillowcase, and I was like, forget it, there's no way I'm gonna be able to afford these. So I was so excited when I found these, but they weren't quite finished, so they needed some batting in them, which I just used an old pillow batting that I had stored away in our attic. And then I put some pins along the edge and I just sewed them shut. I used a very quick stitch, so if ever they got dirty or something, I could just pull that off and wash them. I could have used a zipper, but I just did not want to bother doing that because it would have taken up a lot of my time. And because I have 6 kids and a homestead, I have to be careful with how I use that time, and it did not seem worth it to me at this point to put a zipper on it. Regardless, I was very pleased with how these turned out, and I'm happy to add them to our living room and add a little bit of color in there. Later on, I got a pie crust started. It's a sourdough pie crust, so I have to let it sit for a little bit. But here's the trick, guys. I already had a sourdough pie crust in my freezer, but every time I decide to use that sourdough pie crust, I just make another sourdough pie crust to keep in my freezer. So I'll let it ferment in the fridge for a couple days, and then I'll take it and put it in the freezer, and then I pull it out the next time I need pie crust. And I make another one at the same time so that I'm able to always have one on hand to use quickly. The recipe I came up with is super simple. I use a cup of flour and half a cup of butter. And then I'm going to mix that around either with a pastry cutter, or I just use my hands because I don't want to dirty another thing. And then I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of sugar, a half teaspoon of salt, half a cup of sourdough starter, and a teaspoon of vinegar. And I just mash that around, form it into a ball, smush it down so it's a disc, wrap it up, and then I let it sit in my fridge for a couple days, like I said, and then I throw it in the freezer, thaw it out whenever I need it. Everything that I use in my kitchen, by that I mean all the recipes that I use in my kitchen, are things that I can throw together pretty quickly. If things get too fussy or overwhelming, I just don't bother with them. Not because I don't think I can do it, but because I just don't have the time to be making all these fussy recipes. And so if you see this on my channel, it's because I find it ridiculously easy, or it's easy once you get used to it. And so this is why I like to share these types of recipes with you guys. We are going to be making some maple pie today. Maple pie is popular in Quebec, but I don't think that there are many people that actually know about it. And it's very delicious. It's almost like a maple custard in the middle of the pie. I know it's Lent, so technically my family gives up any kind of like sugary desserts and treats. But because we're going to be having this on Sunday, and Sunday is like a mini Easter, I always make it a point to make a dessert on Sunday. So now I am rolling out that pie dough that I had hidden in the freezer, and I just had let that thaw overnight in the fridge. Once that is rolled out enough, I lift up the dough and I just pop it on top of my pie dish. I place it as close to the actual dish as I can, and then I will cut off the ends. While I was making my pie filling, I just popped the whole thing into the fridge just to keep it nice and together so it wouldn't start melting all over once I put it in the oven. For the pie filling, I added 2 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch to a bowl. I whisked the cornstarch and the flour together, and to that I added 1.5 cups of maple syrup. The better grade you get, the tastier it will be, and I prefer mine a little bit darker so I can really taste the maple flavor. I added the maple syrup to the bowl with the cornstarch and the flour, and I whisked that around as well, making sure that there were no lumps left over. I skimmed some cream off the top of my milk, but you could use just a heavy whipping cream, like a 35%. And I took about a half cup and I added it to my maple syrup mixture. And I also cracked 1 egg, whisked that up, and added that to the mixture as well. Once that was done, I whisked everything as well as I could together, and then I poured the entire thing into my pie crust that I had prepared earlier. I quickly decorated the sides of the pie, and then I put the entire thing into the oven at 425 for 45 minutes. The key to this pie is once you take it out of the oven after 45 minutes, you need it to sit at room temperature for about 2 hours, and then I even popped mine into the fridge to have it firm up a little bit more. The following day after we came back from church, I really wanted to get my seeds organized and get whatever I needed to started. We are in gardening zone 5B, so although our last frost date is not for a little while yet, there are some things that I know I need to start right away. For example, celery and my sweet potato slips, and then eventually my tomatoes and my peppers. The method I use is not complicated at all. I'll take all my seed packets and I'll check the back of the packets. On it, it indicates how many weeks before my last frost date I need to plant. For example, your tomatoes will be like 8 weeks before. Then I take those seed packets and I organize them according to weeks. So 8 weeks go together, 10 weeks go together, 12 weeks go together, and so on and so forth. I put all the same seeds in the same bag and I write the date, so the amount of weeks on that bag. So for example, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. I then count back from the last average frost date that I found online for my zone 5B. And on my calendar, just my regular old calendar, I will write plant 10 weeks, plant 12 weeks. And so on that day, I know to grab that bag and to go and start those specific seeds. I don't have to look for them. I don't have to remember what kind of vegetable. I have them all in my bag. So what you saw right here is our garden. Everything that's under tarps right now is parts of the garden that we're trying to solarize. So basically we're trying to get the sun to come and kill off all the weeds. My husband took over the garden when I had my baby in August, and he just did not keep up with the weeds as well as I would have liked him to. And so we kind of had a disaster going on. And so I'm trying to start a little bit from scratch at this point and try to get all the weeds and the pests gone. I'm in the greenhouse over here. I'm going to be starting some sweet potato slips. Our greenhouse is just like a covered carport that we put some poly on. And we've had it for the last 2 years and actually does extend our growing season quite a bit. Now for these sweet potatoes, I have tried the method where you just put sweet potatoes in water, but a gardener that I've spoken to actually recommended I try to just plant them in soil and keep that soil warm and wet enough instead, so that my seedlings don't get transplant shock when I put them in the garden. So we are trying it this way. We'll see how it works. And then I also wanted to get my celery seeds started. I got a soil blocker, but I was not trusting that the soil blocks would stay together, and because celery is such an important crop for us, I use it all the time and then I freeze the extras for over winter. I just used my regular old cardboard seed starting trays, and that made me feel a little bit better, like it wasn't going to fail. Celery does need to be started quite early because it takes like 20 to 30 days to germinate, which is pretty long. And I add about 3 seeds per hole, and I cut those down to the strongest seedling. I decided to try the soil blocker as an experiment to try some onions. I also ordered onion sets, so I'm not as worried about these failing. And so if they do, it won't be the end of the world. But if anyone has tips on how to use a soil blocker correctly, like what the mix is for the potting soil, I would really appreciate it if you could let me know in the comments. And that's it for this week, guys. I hope you all have a great week. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do so. I'm here every Thursday with a new video. See you next week.